US Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords actually survived being shot in the head at close range was remarkable enough. But for her to find herself in the hands of a uniquely qualified former military surgeon in the nearest hospital in the immediate aftermath of the Tucson shooting was doubly so. In a moment, we'll hear from Dr. Peter Ree, but first, I'm joined by our science correspondent, Julian Rush. Now, what exactly do you think her injuries really were?
Well, we do have some details about the injuries to her brain. What we do know is that the bullet went into her head at the back on the left-hand side, and it exited at the front just above her left eye. Now, that means it's what's called a through-and-through injury, and that is good news in a way, because what it means is that not all the energy of the bullet was dissipated smashing into her brain. Nevertheless, there was considerable damage. On entry, for example, pieces of skull were punched into her brain. They had to be removed, along with the damaged brain tissue. But even so, the surgeons are cautiously optimistic, and that's because the bullet only went through the left-hand hemisphere of her brain. What the surgeons say is that if it had gone into the deep central core, had it crossed into the other half of the brain, gone through both, it could potentially have been fatal.
What does the left side of the brain do?
The left side of the brain controls the right-hand side of the body. It controls some language and some mathematical skills as well. But it's far too soon to say what might be affected, because it's very unpredictable. It depends totally on the trajectory of the bullet. But the key thing here with injuries like this is that it causes swelling on the brain, and that could cause fatal damage. So what the surgeons have done is perform a craniectomy, which is to cut off a section of her skull to allow her brain room to swell.
Julian Rush. Well, earlier I spoke to one of Congresswoman's doctors, Dr. Peter Ree. He's a US Army surgeon who is chief of trauma at the University Medical Center in Tucson, Arizona.
Well, Congresswoman Gifford, over the last 2 days, has been doing as well as we could expect at this time. Without being too overly optimistic, I would say I'm happy with where we are, and I can't think of a better place to be.
Is she actually in a coma?
No, she's not in a coma. She's heavily sedated and under pain medications, which we can control and titrate very well. And we wake her up every so often to see how she's doing.
Is the main medical problem that you now have in this immediate period brain swelling?
Yes, it is. You're right. It's the secondary reaction to the initial injury that she had, which is the primary injury. And normally brain swelling is a major concern of ours. However, in this situation, I would state that it's less of a concern because the neurosurgeons did an operation for penetrating trauma where they left the skull off the head and let the brain swell as it wanted to. So there's not going to be any compromise under that.
Now, you've worked in Iraq, I believe, and I'm wondering, given your experience of these sort of injuries in the field, what is the prognosis for her, A, survival, B, recovery?
Well, I would say, you know, as a physician, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this, but her prognosis for survival is 100%. As far as it being short-term, I mean, hopefully she'll live to be 95 years old. You know, what her recovery is going to do, I really don't know. I am very optimistic, however, that she's not going to be in a vegetative type of state. I think she's going to make a fair amount of recovery. And what kind of deficits that she'll have in the future, I really can't say at this point, but I am still very optimistic.
Given the trajectory of the bullet, are you able to say what functions of the brain that you will be most concerned about? I mean, for example, my understanding is that speech would be that side of the head.
You're absolutely right. You're right. So the left-hand side of the brain normally controls things such as the speech and also movement and sensation on the right side of the body as it crosses over. However, at this time period, what she's going to recover and what's going to be compensated later on is very tough to say. You know, I would say that if you shot a brain on the left side of the brain from, you know, the direction that it had and went and traversed the entire brain matter, the chances of you surviving are small, and the chances of you being able to think and cooperate is even smaller. And she is in a state where she's alive and she can cooperate and she can understand and hear us. So that's a testament that how lucky she was when she got injured, or I'm sorry, you know, relatively how lucky she was, and that everything afterwards had gone well in her favor as well. So we're pleased about all of that circumstance.
At what moment will you be able to tell whether she can speak or indeed whether she can move her right-hand side?
Well, I'm going to rest her for at least a couple more days. at the request of the neurosurgeons. And once I get her off the breathing machine, if everything goes well and she doesn't get what my next fear is a pneumonia from the ventilator, if that goes well and we can get her off the breathing machine, then that's when we'll start to make an assessment of whether she can move her right side and whether she will be able to talk to us. However, if she doesn't at that time period, that does not mean that she won't later on, because the brain, again, has a miraculous way of recovering to a point that, you know, that we never would have expected.
Dr. Peter Ree, Congresswoman Giffords, main surgeon in the operating theatre.